Hello, people. It's the silly one back again. Slightly different time, slightly more flexible week for me. So, thought I'd take the opportunity to get this one out there, get this one recorded and twitched and YouTube for your wonderful entertainment and out there. And let me remember to do what I always forget to do, which is to turn the sound off on myself. For those of you that aren't aware or haven't streamed, I have like 5 windows open at the moment across 3 screens. One with OBS, which I use, a couple with what I'm going to show you guys on the main screen, which is what you can see. And then I have another window open with the chat and the logs and everything else, and invariably my phone and other things. And I always forget to turn the sound off on the live stream of me, which I have up in order to check the text and see if anyone's typing in and doing stuff. Not that it happens very much, because I appreciate that my time is out of normal kilter, shall we say. So today's topic is war funds and think tank, two of the highly regarded, very flexible, and very widely used resources. And if you go and look at most of the decks, and there are ones included in the BT Tactics expansion, the starter decks, which I wrote, and Michael very generously put a reference in for, and included the document I wrote as to what I was trying to achieve with each of the starter documents, to give a bit of background and whatever else. Or if you use the renamed version of those that have come out on the League, or the League version of BattleTech, because that's basically BT Tactics with the tactics cards taken out, and all the stuff that Michael did in setting it all up and turning it into Lackey, all the quality check that I did, all the sealed deck stuff that I did, and the research and implementation and all the changes I had to convince him to do, because obviously he doesn't like changing stuff, and I don't blame him, to be honest. It's in a really good place. That's now been cobbled together with a load of stuff hacked out and put into the League as the classic, or whatever they want to call it. They're the same decks. But alongside those, there are a few World Championship decks, not all of them by a long way. There are a number missing, and some of them aren't named particularly well either. You will see that they have a reasonably similar type of resource distribution. There's a few tweaks here and there. Somebody goes a little higher, somebody goes a little lower. But they will all have war funds in, and they will all have think tank in. And certainly before the tactics nerf to war funds, which after testing it got reverted, and the League, which has the same nerf but still in effect to war funds. Um, why is it still included? Why is it so popular? And is it really actually as good as people think it is? And I think the general answer to that is it probably is, but people aren't aware of some of the downsides. And I think this is probably where this is going, or this what this is designed to point out. Okay, so anyway, before I ramble on and whatever else, let's look at the card itself. It's an Arsenal card. It's a straight one cost. It's a command resource, and it came out in Arsenal, as I said, one cost, and it can be used by anybody. It's not faction specific, and it literally says tap, gain a resource. Great. Okay, I've got to pay 1 to get my resource, but I can pay 1 to get it, and I can tap it straight away and get my 1 back to use on something else. So as a development point, I've actually paid for it straight away, which isn't too bad. And then underneath it says scrap war funds to search your stockpile for any resource card. So that's any card with the resource keyword you can see in the middle of there next to the command. Okay, and deploy it. It does not count as a deployment. Okay, you still have to pay the cost of it, but you get it for free on the table. You then have to pay for it in order to use it effectively. Shuffle your stockpile afterwards. Use this ability during your deploy phase. Okay, so notable cards that have the resource keyword. Well, obviously, there is your standard tactics, logistics, assembly, politics, and munitions, all of those. Think Tank has a resource keyword, so you can scrap your war funds and go and draw your Think Tank. The wonderful Black Market Connections, again, 2 copies of that, probably in every deck, has the resource keyword. And our wonderful pilot-friendly Solaris Contracts has the resource keyword. So people that ran pilot decks would run a number of war funds in order to go and draw Solaris Contacts, for example. Okay, before war funds, they probably had 4 Solaris Contacts in the deck. Afterwards, they trimmed a couple of resources and put war funds in. Okay, and simply it allows you to go and get whichever resource you need, which is great. And everyone thinks that's wonderful, and in effect, it is. Okay, there is, however, a little downside, which we will explore in a few minutes. Okay. Second on today's agenda is the lovely Think Tank, which has been a pretty good staple since the start of the game, being released in limited or unlimited format, whichever you want to call it. A 0-cost resource. Tap for a resource. Great. Doesn't give you any assets, assembly, munitions, politics, tactics, logistics. However, you can scrap this card and choose an asset. You have that asset available for the rest of the game. Use this ability on your turn or during a mission on any opponent's turn. Okay, so it has to be in a mission. Can't just randomly scrap it, which is why Arrow 4 is often played by a number of people, because you can kill the Think Tank with the Arrow 4 and it's not a mission, and away it goes. It only has, well, it has 5 armor and 1 structure, which is why it's Arrow 4 bait. Okay, so you can scrap this and get yourself out of jail because you don't seem to be drawing assembly cards. You can scrap this to gain assembly for the rest of the game. Very nice. Okay, however, they're in everyone's decks. Are they as good as people think they are? Okay. And just while I'm here, I'm just going to, for those people that struggle a little with decks, I'm going to give you a start. Okay. So the standard start for a 3-asset deck is something along the lines of 8, and I'm just going to go with assembly, logistics, and tactics. You can mix them up. You go with 8 of your prime, 3 of your lowest, 5 of your middle, 2 Think Tank, 4 War Funds, 2 Black Market. Okay, that gives you 8, 3, and 5, 16 basic resources, 4 War Funds, 2 Think Tanks, 2 Black Markets. Okay, it's a pretty standard one. If you're going to run a pilot deck, and this is what I've used the sideboard for, we've got 8 assembly, 6 tactics. Okay, that's 14. That's right on the edge of where you want to be. But you have 4 War Funds, 2 Solaris, 2 Think Tank, 1 Black Market. And you might even decide, you know what, I'm not going to run a Think Tank. I'm going to stick another tactics in there. I might drop a War Funds, whatever. But it's a good place to start and it works out quite reliable. In this case, you've diversified from 2, well, you've got 2 assets and you're playing pilot. If you're not playing pilot, take the Solaris out and you probably add another assembly and another tactics. And then you can War Funds for your Black Market reasonably reliably, or War Funds for the other asset if you find yourself without it at the start of the game. And if you've got 3 assets, then something like this is another split. You could, if you want a bit more reliability, you might decide to drop a Think Tank. You might go with another tactics, for example, in this case, and drop the Think Tank to 1. The other one I have seen, and if I get rid of this, is I've seen people. Let me just clear that. Let's go new deck. I've seen people go with 6 of one asset, 6 of another, 6 of the third one, 6 War Funds, and probably a Black Market. Okay, And very often with the one black market, they're playing Steiner and they run Melissa to cover it. Okay. And this is kind of like an equal asset split, and you use your war funds to go and draw whichever assets you want. Which, again, it's kind of less reliable because you're not guaranteed to draw either of your main assets, and they've all got equal probability. But your war funds is there to take up the slack. And the reason for that is that if you don't draw an asset or one of these, then the chances are you've probably drawn your war funds, and you've got basically 26 in there, 4 lots of 4. Whether that's quite as good, I'm not so sure about. I think you need to look at your mix and whatever else. So anyway, that's enough about what people run and how they run it. So let's have a look at how people deploy things. Okay, and this is a big old spreadsheet, and I'm just going to walk you through it and tell you about the assumptions I have made here in order to simulate this. Okay, so in this case, we aren't actually running any war funds, any think tanks, or any black markets. We are running 24 base normal support resources. 24, I mean, that could be something like 8 assembly, 8 logistics, 8 politics, or whatever else it is. Okay, and this is on a standard 24, 12, 24 mix. For those of you that are not aware of that, go back and look through some of the YouTube videos. The first thing I do is the 24, 12, 24. And it's 24 resources, 12 missions or commands, and 24 mechs. And it's a great place to start. And then after that, you mess around with it. But it's a good template or a good starting point. Okay. And the reason this is a good starting point is you will draw in your first 5 cards by the law of averages, and this is purely based on law of averages, 24, 12, 24, you will draw 2 resources, 1 command or mission, and 2 mechs in your opening hand. And then after that, you, over the next 5 cards, going first, where you draw 1 card and then 2 more, you will draw the same mix again of 2 resources, 1 mission or command, 2 units. Now, people shuffle decks. Lackey goes randomized. Everything goes pear-shaped. But I have to model it some way. And I have to kind of use that in order to give you an idea. And I'm giving every option the same level of consistency with what they've got. Okay, so here we start with 2 resources. Here we go. Here's the 12, 24. Resources 2, commands missions 1, and units 1. Okay, so you go first. Okay, and in fact, what this and that's a bit messy to start with. What have you got on the table? Turn 1. I'll do the same here. I'm going to have to change all of these over. All right, modeling all these things, but you get them in the wrong box and everything goes pear-shaped. Okay, so turn 1, you're going to draw a card. So you're going to draw a resource, you're going to draw a mission or command, or you're going to draw a mech. And in this case, the green denotes where there is a change. So in this case, I've gone from 2 resources to drawing a resource, which is why it's green. And therefore, I now have 3 resources, 1 command, 2 units in my hand. And I'm going to play a resource. The next turn, law of averages, I draw a command and I draw a unit. I play another resource. Okay, so my resources go down, etc., etc. Next turn, I draw a resource. I don't draw a command, I draw a mech. Okay, so I now play another resource each turn. Okay, so you can see how it goes. I draw 1, I draw 2, I draw 2. Those are my 5. So I've now drawn 10 cards. I should have 4 resources, 2 commands or missions, and 4 mechs in my hand if you've got a 12, 24, 24 deck. Obviously, that never happens. Shuffling, die rolls, being hit by another guy, all sorts of things. Put all of this into the totally it never happens schedule. as Terry Pratchett said, 1,000,000 to 1 chances happen 99 times in 100, or 9 times out of 10, I think is the actual quote. But you get the idea that you are expecting to draw and deploy and build stuff, okay? And what you draw gives you what you can deploy, and therefore the number of assets gives you what you can build. Okay, so at this point you've got a resource on the table, then you've got another resource and another resource and another resource, and with 24 straight resources, because we're not scrapping any of them, we're just putting them out there and assuming that our opponent doesn't attack them, and all the other factors that can happen in there, you will continue to develop your resources in such a way that actually you can probably go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 on the first turns. Okay, and I've gone up to the drawing of 20 cards, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 turns. Okay, and the reason for that is I often say 40 cards is probably the limit of damage of what you need to do to kill someone. So it could be that you draw loads and loads of resources, don't deploy anything, and you die horribly. Or even it's the other way, your opponent draws nothing, you draw a great draw, you've got all these resources flying down, and you've got mechs flying down, and you kill them. Okay, so that's where my simulation ends after you've drawn 20 cards, a third of your deck. Okay, and over here, just a confirmation of the draw chance of 40%, 2 in 5 for a resource, 1 in 5 for a command and mission, and 40%, here we go, 2 in 5 for a unit. Okay, so that's what happens if you go first. Okay, if you go second, I think that should be green. Again, you've got the same thing going on. Actually, let me undo that. Okay, so you start with 5 cards, you draw 2. So actually that is right. That should be green because it's changed. And literally you draw on 40% chance a resource and a unit. And the next turn you draw a command and a unit. And then after that you're on to resource and unit again. And you can see how this progresses until you draw your command and you don't draw a mech. And again, this is purely modelling. It's not perfect. You could argue that this is more likely to happen here or there or whatever else. But for our purposes, it shows how you will draw and therefore what you can put on the table. So if you say, right, I've got 7 cards, I'm going to put down a 1 cost resource and a 1 cost unit and pay for it, then that's pretty reasonable. You might be able to make a case for putting 2 resources down, but we're going to try and smooth this out so you get a similar level of deployment as per going first. So then you will draw, in this case, a mission and a command or mission and a mech, and then you'll put down one of your other resources and build something else at 2 cost. And then you'll get another one, and you can maintain that, and you can probably get to 8, I suspect. And the last thing at the end here is that this, a bit like here, is a 50-50 about which one you draw. But you can see that in those 21 cards in this case, because you're going second, you probably, on average, with 24 pure resources in your deck, are in a position to put a resource out each turn and deploy a mech. Okay, so that's my simple model. Okay, no fancy war funds, no fancy think tanks, nothing else, just 3 resources. Okay, you can say that that's 24 resources and that's 12 assembly and 12 tactics or logistics and munitions, whatever you want. The numbers effectively are still the same. Okay. It doesn't necessarily take into account a 3 resource mix, but I don't think if you went for 8 of each that you're going to have too many problems. And it's a simple model that doesn't necessarily take into account any of the buyouts of any of the units involved. The point being, I have constant ramp. I have a constant fly up, use this hand, of resources going up. Okay. So Hopefully you're happy so far. All right. Now, let's do the same model, he says. But this time, we have 16 pure resources, 16 ALM or T. We have 4 war funds, 2 think tanks, and a black market. And this changes the probabilities, and this skews the curves. Okay. Oh, somebody's griefing me. So many windows. I'm using the phone. Oh, thank you, Mitch. I will read that shortly, mate. Gotta love Artillery Guy in Canada. They're great fun, especially when you can wake them up at 5:30 in the morning with a bizarre question, which is what I did, I'm afraid. Sorry, Mitch. Hope you sleep well, mate. Okay. So, back to the wonderful fun. 24 resources, 4 war funds, 2 think tanks, 2 black markets. Now, in this case, we've diverted from our 24, 12, 24. We're down to 16, 20, 24, because I am counting the war funds, the think tanks, and the black markets as commands. They are. I mean, resources are a subset of commands anyway, and not units. Oh god, here he goes again. This will be another Mitch. This will be another Mitch. What you got, mate? All right. Yeah. Okie doke. So I'm counting them. I'm not counting them as resources, and the reason I'm not counting them as resources is that I want to show how this affects resource development and curve, because that's where war funds and think tank have an effect. Okay. So, 16 resources. This time, we are more likely to start with 1 resource in hand and have 2 commands and missions and 2 units because of the distribution. It's not a perfect split because we're talking probably about 4 in 15 for our resources. 16 there is not quite a perfect fit, but basically it's 4 in 15. 1 in 3 for our commands and missions, and 40% for our units. Again, probabilities. So what this is likely to do is we are likely to go somewhere like resource, and then our third resource is likely to be a war funds or think tank, because 16, 4 war funds, 2 think tanks, 6 is into 22, it's about a quarter. It's going to appear on turn 3 or turn 4, one way or the other. Maybe I've been a little generous with putting it on 3, but that's where the argument comes in. Okay, so again, you start, you draw a resource, that goes, and then this lot comes out, and I'm going to do the same with here, just for consistency when compared to the other ones. Okay, it doesn't affect the table below. So anyway, right, so going first, draw a card, play a resource. Going, drawing your second turn, because of the shift, you are likely to draw a command and mission and or a unit. So you have 2 resources that you've drawn. You've played one of them. You are likely to play the second, which means you're not likely to have as many resources in your hand. Okay. Then on the 10th card you draw, you're likely to draw your next resource, which is just in time, effectively, in this model. And you draw another unit, and your commands stay the same. And what this means is that you may well, at this point, play your war funds and think tank. Now, if we go back to war funds, I have to pay 1 for it. So if I pay 1 for my war funds, that's 1 that I cannot use to build a mech. Yes, I get my 1 back by tapping it, but I still have the 1 to pay. So if I have 2 resources down and play my war funds, I've still got 2 resources to pay for my mech. I use 1 to pay for the war funds, and I get my other 1 from war funds and my other spare 1 to give me 2. Okay, so I don't actually boost my curve. Wrong hand. I know, I feel like I should be in the Bangles Walk Like an Egyptian video with this. So it stalls your development slightly. Okay, bear that in mind. Now, if I go for Think Tank, it gets worse. Let's go back to Think Tank, wherever we are. Come on, Think Tank. Let me just open that one again and get my Think Tanks back. So you pay nothing for it. It goes down. You tap it. You scrap it. You get your resource. And you think, well, hold on a minute. Got 2 resources on the table. I've put this down, which is a deployment. I've tapped it for a resource, which gives me 3. And then I've scrapped it. What's wrong with that? Well, what's actually wrong with that is that you're not due on my little schedule to draw another resource next turn. It's going to be the turn after. So that gives you a spike where you go up to 3 resources for that turn and then you drop to 2. So next round, you're only going to have 2 resources to pay for your units because you are likely to draw one of the commands or missions and one of the units. Okay. And don't worry about the complications of that. I've got a nice little graph to show you the pictures in a minute. It's all pretty and lovely. Yes. So, and that's where this graph, which goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, with 24 resources. But when we go to our War Funds Think Tank version, it goes 1, 2, 2, 3, 3, 4, 4, 5. So you don't actually have as many resources available to you to build stuff, even though you've got the ones you want. Okay, and that's an important factor. People like resources, and I know the counter argument to this is coming, and I'm going to deal with it straight away. People say, if I scrap War Funds and go and get a resource and pull it out of my deck, then basically I'm compressing my deck. I've got less resources in there to draw, and I am more likely to draw a mech or a command. And yes, that's true. But if you think that one resource in the deck means probably about a 3% additional chance. So is it going to make a huge difference? Maybe. I think maybe multiple War Funds will add up. Definitely agree with that. But in the short term, I'm not so sure. Okay. So there is an effect of War Funds and Think Tank that effectively gimps your curve, gimps your resource development curve. Now, in most tournament decks, you go and pull the Bulldog Oops by Chad, the Steiner Bulldog Swarm from '99, which I'm not sure if I've got it to hand. I might be able to find it actually. You will see that because you've got so many free deploys and so many low-cost mechs, you don't want to be putting that many resources out. You don't want to be putting 5 resources on the table because you've got nothing to spend them on. Everything's dirt cheap and flies out really quick. And in that kind of deck, a low-cost swarm deck, War Funds is great. You get what you want when you need it. You don't need the additional resources, and you get a little bit of deck compression. It's perfect. It's a card made for swarms. Okay. In pilot decks, you get the Solaris contracts when you want them, effectively, providing you've got it in hand, to put your pilots out. Great. But if you look at all the Solaris pilot decks, most of them are cheap mechs again for that reason. Okay. None of them follow the bigger mech, longer term deployment strategy that pure 24 resources give you. They are not trying to put out an 8-cost mech on turn 10, or turn 8 in this case. They are trying to put out lots and lots of cheap mechs earlier than that to swarm the board. So War Funds works really, really well. And again, just, I know I've done go first. I'll talk through go in second. Again, you have the same draw of resources and you have the same deployment of units, and you end up basically with the similar curve that you've got above, with 1, 2, 2, 3, 3, 4, 4, 5 resources, because every so often you have to scrap one of these in order for them to have an effect. Now, if you don't scrap them, your curve's going to go up, but the chances are that you're going to use them for something. Okay, and if that's a black market, then that's even different. Okay, so we end up with a number of scenarios here. Okay, the first one on my list is the standard deployment curve for 24 pure resources that I highlighted at the start. And literally, for the first 9 turns, this comes out at 1 resource a turn, and then you can slap down what you want. Okay. When you've got 16 resources, 16 resources, 4 war funds, and 2 think tanks, your standard curve is going to be 1, 2, 2, 3, 3, 4, 4, 5, 5. Okay. Now, there are a number of variants on here. You deploy and scrap war funds when you need it. Okay, it pretty much follows that model which I've shown you. That's what happened. However, you can deploy war funds, tap it for a resource this turn, and then scrap it next turn after you've tapped it for the resource. And that gives you a bit of a ramp. Yay, got the right hand this time. Okay, and you can see here that this on turn 3, this goes from 2 resources on the table to actually having 4 effectively, because you've tapped your war funds for 1, scrapped it, gone and picked another one, which you tap again, which gives you 2 extra. And then the following turn, it drops if you haven't got your war funds anymore and you've replaced it with a basic resource. So you get that hump, that ramp, and then it drops because you've scrapped your war fund. Okay. Likewise, we get the same thing when you deploy and scrap think tank. You've got the same curve going forward. And if you deploy and tap and scrap think tank the following turn, that actually gives you the opposite effect, where on turn 3 you've got 3 resources, and then the next turn you scrap your think tank, or that turn you scrap your think tank early, and you are not due to get another resource on the standard draw. Okay, standard draw. Not due to get another resource for another turn. You really do gimp your curve. Okay, and if you go back to where I started with this kind of session, with the resource development and the curves, and using the Travis and Enkelbry match as a bit of a starter for that, or a catalyst for it, go and watch it, and you see that Travis has got a Phantom D in his hand, and he deploys a think tank, and he taps it and scraps it that turn, but he doesn't realise that he's actually now only got 5 resources on the table, and he can't put his Phantom D out. And if he'd waited a turn, then he would have done that, and he could have scrapped it the following turn. I think he scraps it for logistics from memory, but don't quote me on it. Etc. Etc. And by deploying a think tank, tapping it and scrapping it is arguably one of the worst things you can do, unless you are absolutely desperate for that resource. And then sometimes you are. I mean, I've started games with a tactics in my hand, and I've got 2 Centurion Ds, and something like a politics card and a mission, and I'm thinking, crap. And then you don't draw an assembly, you don't draw a war fund, you draw a think tank, and you're thinking, okay, I've put T and one of my Centurion. I'm going to have to go think tank and tap it, and if I don't tap it, I'm not going to get a blocker out, and I'm left with 1 tactics on the table and a Centurion in my hand, and I'm praying that I draw a resource next turn. Otherwise, I'm stalling, and I'm in struggle, and I've lost games like that. Okay, and then obviously if you deploy and tap and scrap think tank next turn, then you kind of get the blip, but again, it's where it happens. Okay, so let's just have a look at what that looks like when we compare the War Funds deck to the 24 Resources deck. So here's our 24 Resources deck in blue. Everything starts off lovely. Okay, it just keeps going and going and going. It is a resource factory. You get all the resources that you want on. Probably churn them out at 1 a turn. Okay, with the 16 resources, 4 war funds, 2 think tank kind of model, you start off similar, and then it dips where you have to scrap. Okay, And again, it works on the fact that you have to pay for your war funds, which is the disadvantage of the war funds. You've got to pay for it, and or if you scrap your think tank, then I've got what I want this turn, but I'm actually a resource less next turn and the turn after and the turn after. And that's something to consider, that when I scrap my think tank, that resource, much as I've gone and got assembly or logistics or whatever it is I need, I am not going to have that resource for the rest of the game. I am giving up. I am gimping my curve. And it may well be that that's fine for my deck. It may well be that that's a total nightmare for my deck. Okay. So, when is the good time to scrap? And I know this looks like one of those railway station maps. Please forgive me. Again, I will explain. Okay. Let's move that out of the way. Okay. So I've got resources here across turns, and the standard deployment is here in blue, and you can see that curve, it rockets up there. Okay. And then when we've got our standard kinky curve here, you can see this is kind of the yellowish curve, which only really makes an appearance here because the reds and the greens go over the top of it. Okay. So 16 war funds. Here's the blue one that we want to talk about, or I want to talk about, where you deploy and scrap. You deploy, tap war funds for a unit, and then scrap it the following turn. So here we go. We go 1, 2, up to 3. Then you scrap it, and then it gets replaced, and it dips, and away you go again, because you get them the following turn. Because you don't draw your resources. And again, you can see this with the think tank. When you draw it in there, you don't draw again, it's flat. And then when you deploy and scrap the think tank, you go up 1, 2, 3, and you scrap it for an asset. You get the asset, but you're not due to get another resource the following turn, and you're left with 2. And that's where think tank really, really hurts you. And then hopefully you draw the assets you need. The other thing to remember, and again, this is completely impractical and totally impossible to model. You probably need some degree in astrophysics programming and access to a supercomputer, but you can probably do the probabilities of what happens when he attacks you and does damage to your stockpile, because some of those are going to get scrapped. And there's a fair chance that they're going to be resources as well. And I can't even model that. And can't. I'm never going to model that. And I've just kept it really easy for demonstration purposes. But that is another effect that you have to think. You're desperate for resources. The chances are, when the guy pings you with his dasher, the chances are he's going to kill 3 resources, and your next draw is going to be a mission and a mech. That's life. That's card games, I'm afraid. There's no way you can get around that. It always happens. 9 times out of 10, because it's a 1,000,000 to 1 chance. And then finally, the deploy and scrap think tank on the next turn. You do your deployment, you get your extra bonus, and then it drops. And again, you can see that it gimps. You just basically deferring when you have less resources. And to that extent, there is an argument there that you can plan for that based on what you have in your hand. If you've got a 3 cost and a 2 cost, and you're thinking, right, I'll get the 3 cost out this turn, and then I'm going to tap my think tank in order to pay for it, and I'm going to know that next turn I'm only going to have 2 resources, and then I've got my 2 mech to come out, then I'm going to be able to put something on the table. And if I draw another resource, great. I can repair something or do something else with it, or see what other units I draw. But it's important to note that they have effects. So I think the general consensus here is war funds bad? Yes, if you play it wrong, because you can gimp your curve. Is think tank bad? It can be quite drastic if you get to that really desperate point in gimping your curve. Okay, in tournament decks, because they run a lot lower in mech cost, then war funds is always going to make an appearance, because realistically, 5 cost mech, go back to Peter's Boom Wolf. Top end mech is a 5 cost unit. You're going to be in a position to pull that out straight away, and away you go. Might even be able to build it earlier. Fine. But you know that's find me a deck apart from a clan Big Mac deck or a double overtime deck that in a tournament situation has many 5 costs or more, and there aren't any. Go and look through them. There are one or two that have clan Big Mac decks. You know, you look at Chris Lunt's Star League Pilot, and you know that it's got a Spartan in there. And the reason for the Spartan is and everyone misses this on the Spartan, is medium. It's a medium, and it's great for blocking medium clan stuff, which does make an appearance. That's the only reason it's there. Yes, it's expensive at 7. Yeah, go back to Shyster's Tom Shyster Smith's deck for the Rocky Gorge Master, and he says he has Ronda's Highlander in there. Okay, and it's arguably a debatable choice. 3-10-3 missile 1 overheat 1 +2 jump, everything gets -1. It's durable and you can send it across the other half of the table and it's probably going to survive. But he said, I never played it. I never put it on the table. It always came out and went into the sideboard after the first match because the games went that quick I could never get it on the board. That's why. Didn't have more than five resources there. Okay. So let's wrap this up. So conclusions are war funds, is it bad? Only if you use it in the wrong place. And people need to think about when they use it and how it gives the curve. So it can be bad if you play it wrong. It can be great when it does what you want it to do. Okay. Think Tank, worse if you play it wrong. If you play it wrong, you can seriously gimp your curve. Okay. However, in tournament standard, shorter decks where everything costs less and it's all about speed and board presence, etc., both definitely have their place, which is why when you look at those tournament standard decks that win world championships, they are ever present since their inclusion. Since they were put into the game, they have been a feature, and that's why, because nobody tries to put out 9-cost units because generally the game is over at that point. If you are playing to a non-tournament standard and in a friendly environment, then you could quite conceivably keep it simple. You could just go with 24 units. 24 basic resources. And you can probably have a reasonably decent curve. You know, 1 per turn, turn up those few. So, if you're playing a little more relaxed and you want to go slightly heavier, put out the odd Grendel, for example, or a Black Lana, or a couple of Zeuses, or a Banshee, or something like that. And I mean the decent Banshee, not the 4-cost 2 damage not omnipotent one, the impotent one. Then fine, is that a better option for you? Might give you the reliability, but your curve isn't gimped. And, maybe that's something to consider, And as ever, who says I'm right? Who says I'm wrong? It is a simulation stroke analysis. It looks at the deployment curves. It is what it is. It's as simple as you can get it to. Well, put it like this: if I didn't make it this simple, I probably couldn't model it. And if you couldn't model it, then I can't get you guys to understand it. So yes, there are a load of factors in there, but I think there is food for thought about how you deploy and how you build your decks. And as I said, if you're going to go relaxed, go with this. If you don't like it, change it. No problem with that. You think, oh, I'll take war funds out and put another resource of each type in. Great. And then it doesn't work. Don't do it straight away. Give it 2 or 3 games, please. Otherwise, my name will be mud. But it does mean, it does give you a viable option. You don't have to play with it. It's just that for those reasons, with this build curve and tournaments, then people go that way. And certainly when you look at the league variation, there are so many more cheap units left, right, and centre that people are going to run for war funds. In fact, they don't need to run so many war funds because nothing's got buyouts. It just means you can play whichever assets you want, which subterfuge or logistics cards you want, and basically say sod the assets. Assembly is only really there now to repair stuff, tactics to play missions. Munitions is too powerful with the um, tapping and untapping or un-alpha striking stuff and depleting it, and especially if you use think tank to pay for the munitions, having the asset in play, I think that's a bit dodgy. I think munitions needs to be tapped in order to do that, and it should only be one mech per turn as well. Especially when you're also giving it 3 damage on missiles and whatever else. Um, but anyway, so play around with it, have a look at it, see if you like it, see if it works that way. You know, is War Funds that great? I think War Funds is really, really good. I think the problem is that if you use it wrong, it's not as good as it could be, and I think Think Tank has the potential to be misused and screw you over. Okay. Anyway, that's my take on War Funds. Yes, it's good, but yeah. Okay. So yeah, there's my take on War Funds. There's the theory behind where I'm heading with it, and looking at your deployment strategies, and you can see the differences in the curves. So hopefully that shows that War Funds 2 resources. War Funds can be bad, and Think Tanks worse. As ever, try it out, and tell me if you think I'm wrong. Probably am. And whatever. And if there's anything you want me to do, then great. I will do my best to keep my one viewer really happy and entertained. Just give me a shout, and I'll try and do some stuff. And thank you for listening to my inane babble, and I wish you a very good rest of your day. Have fun, take care. It's a big bad word out there.